Hello, welcome to Rye Brook Focus. My name is John Mugno, and I will be the host of today's discussion. The topic today is the village's response to the impact of Hurricane Ida when it hit the village in early September, causing much damage and the death of 2 residents. Today, I'm very pleased that we have 4 guests who led the village's response to the storm. In alphabetical order, they are Chief Greg Austin of the Rye Brook PD, Chief Engineer Herbert Bocchino of the Portchester Fire Department, Chris Bradbury, the Village Administrator, and Michal Nowak, the Rye Brook Superintendent of Public Works and Engineer. Welcome to each of you, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you, John.
I think what we can do is organize this according to the phases of the storm. And what I think we should start with first is what the emergency response plan was for the village and how people started to respond as the strength of the storm became apparent. Now, I'll leave it to you gentlemen to kind of organize who speaks about what, but please.
Maybe I'll kind of give an overview first. So we do, prior to storm events, Westchester County and Con Edison tend to give us information on what they have available in terms of what upcoming storms, what they anticipate or what they expect. So we receive some advance information about particular storms. Depending on that, then there could be conference calls with Con Ed, conference calls with Westchester County. And then many times what we do is we'll either talk or meet together as our emergency operations center. In terms of who leads that operations center, that's, primarily Greg and I talk about when that wants, the police chief and I talk when it wants to set up that way. And then, but it's really a team effort. And we have representatives of all the departments, the fire department, public works, EMS, and we have plans that we go through that, we've learned from all the storms in terms of going around and sometimes we don't need to meet, we'll be talking throughout the days leading up to it. And we check in with everybody, checking people's schedules, checking about who's available to come in if they need to. We talk about cleaning basins out, making sure that they're clear for storms or flooding so that they're not blocked up with leaves or other debris. There's no blockages prior to storms. Any events that might have to be canceled. So that's our typical procedure prior to the events. In this event, we did start to, Greg or Michael, maybe, and Herbie, maybe you guys want to talk about your departments. We did start to call in a public works crew early in the flooding process in case there was any road closures and so forth. But maybe, Michael, you want to talk about you guys maybe first?
Well, on the highway department, and we monitor storm, as Mr. Bradbury had said, a few days out, and we make sure that all our equipment is up and running. We check for manpower. It's hard to prep for a storm like this because you don't know what you're going to get. So at a certain point, we respond on the fly, but as we started getting calls during this storm event, we started calling in a few crews to respond accordingly. So we had upwards of, I would say, probably 5 to 6 persons working at that moment, and they were driving around and checking our hot spots, our locations, and going from there.
Hey, well, Michael, can I interrupt 1 second? How would you define a hot spot in that sense?
Well, areas which are starting to flood, areas that we know are prone to flooding, such as Rich Manor Park, Wyman Street, Rockridge Drive, Acker Concord. All these are spots that we know are sensitive to water. And these are spots that we typically check a few times during the storm.
And Brook Lane, of course, too.
And Brook Lane. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. Correct.
Okay.
So that day, that was a Wednesday, it was a rainy day all day. And it didn't really get very bad throughout the daylight hours. And so we worked our regular shift and went home our regular time. And the police department is a 24-hour operation. So we had the evening shift come in, and we had extra officers on only because we anticipated it to get bad, but we didn't know how bad. So we had officers here just ready, which is not what we normally do. Usually we'll either hold officers from the day shift, or we'll call in officers from the overnight shift, for an evening shift, just to have extra officers. And so we held some people, but it really didn't start to get bad until around 9 o'clock, 9:30. I had gotten a call from the desk sergeant, Sergeant Carroll, telling me that things had just tipped in the other direction. And, and that's when it really was the rain was really coming down in sheets. And he was getting calls for evacuations and flooding. And so we had to even call in more officers at that point. We called officers who live locally to come in, and we had Sergeant Greco come in and assist Sergeant Carroll on the desk, because there were just so many phone calls coming into the desk, we couldn't answer all at the same time. So it wasn't really until about 9:30 that things started to get bad, that we really needed to have the personnel here.
It was definitely the volume of water was unprecedented in this area in a short period of time, and that was something that nobody expected it to be that intense. We've dealt with really significant floods in the past. We've seen over the 100-year storm levels. We've seen really bad flooding in Rye Brook, but this was the worst we've seen it, and in such a short period of time. I mean, it was the first time that the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency in the New York tri-state area. That means, and it's very, very rare for that to happen. And that means there's a threat to human life and catastrophic damage. That's the first time ever that National Weather Service in the tri-state area in New York has actually issued that type of an emergency warning. So it just peaked very quickly in a short period of time.
Right. And going back, like the nor'easter in March of 2007, and then like a month later we had the other nor'easter in April. I mean, those were bad storms or bad flooding, but that flooding was over a period of hours, and this was just over a period of minutes. It just the way the rain fell and it just saturated everything. I mean, the rain throughout the day just saturated the ground, that when this heavy rain came, there was nowhere for it to go. And in a lot of respects, this storm was much worse than Sandy when it came to flooding. The flooding in this storm was incredible.
Yeah,
never seen before.
And John, if I can, I'm going to pull up the screen just to show that, because I think it's very helpful to demonstrate. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
So just to show you a little bit about what was happening in this short period of time, this is the rain rate, and the orange is the rain rate, and the blue is the amount of inches. We had 8.5 inches total rain for the storm, but not just that. With the intensity that we had, we're talking about over 6 inches in a 2.5 hour period. We're talking, in 1 hour we had almost 4 inches. This is unprecedented, and that's what took everybody, something we haven't seen before, and that type of intensity. So, you see, we were closer to the 500-year storm than the 100-year storm by far.
And if I could add on top of that, now take those rain rates into consideration over a period of maybe 4 or 5 hours, which is what the storm was at its peak intensity. Our storm drain systems are only designed for what's known as a 10-year storm event, which is 2.5 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period. Here we got over 2.5 inches in half an hour. So it just overwhelmed any drainage system anywhere in the village.
Good. Bocchino, maybe we could, oh, sorry, go ahead.
What happened with this storm was the storm before that, they over predicted it. We were well prepared, as far as bringing in manpower and that. This storm, they didn't, we were never given anywhere near the amount of rain that we had received by the National Weather Service. They didn't, that was not ever predicted, that excessive amount in that shorter period of time. So we did, the fire department, we have 7 volunteer fire companies within the village of Portchester. They were all put on standby with volunteers manning the apparatus. We then we had Rye Brook manned as usual, with crews ready to be called in on if need be, which we ended up doing after the rain event really became apparent, and we started getting a lot of rain. But again, it caught us a little bit by surprise because it was never predicted to be that severe of a rain event.
Yeah,
That's
it
true.
definitely-
That's true.
that is definitely true.
Yeah, yeah.
This one, nobody expected that kind of intensity in that short a period of time. It was just, that was overwhelming at one point in time, and it became more about life safety at that point for everyone involved.
Yeah, and that the storm that was like 2 weeks before that, it was over predicted, and we did prepare for that, and we expected that to be bad, and it didn't turn out to be anywhere near what was predicted. So, and I think the fact that throughout the day it rained, and it rained hard, but it wasn't anything that we could not handle, and it just all of a sudden, just buckets started falling on. That we just and what happens is it takes people by surprise, because people are getting ready to go to bed, and all of a sudden their house is getting filled with water, and and people are calling to be evacuated, and the best place for them to be is just stay in their homes, and just shelter in place, and people just were not ready to hear that, and because it was just not, it wasn't safe for even the emergency responders to respond to certain areas. It was just better for people to stay there and wait for the water to recede. Because one thing with this storm is that when it started to come down heavy, we knew that there was an end in sight, because it was predicted to stop around 2:30 in the morning, and sure enough, it started slowing down around 2:15. By 2:30, it was not raining heavy at all. So at least the predictions were were accurate, and then at that point we were able to do the evacuations and the recovery at that point.
I would
Well,
imagine
the most dangerous areas are always going to be along the brooks, because that's where all of our stormwater from properties all throughout the village flow into brooks. At some point in time, whatever's not captured on the individual properties, the flow is basically going to go into the brook, and that's going to continue to flow downstream, ultimately through Rye Brook, then down through Rye City, and then ultimately into Long Island Sound. So anywhere you're on the brook, it's not just the water that's in there neighboring coming from in that area, it's everything coming from up north of them as well.
I would imagine that because of the rate at which the rain fell, there must have been some problem actually in calling in additional staff during that period, because in fact it would be unsafe for them to make the journey to wherever you wanted them to be.
Yeah, that's true. Like when I got the initial call, we called in officers who live locally, officers who live in Portchester and Rye Brook and White Plains, but the lieutenant, he lives in Dutchess County, and and when I called him, I called him with just the expectation to say, hey, it's getting bad, get ready. He goes, okay, I'm on my way in, and he just jumped in his car and went. And this is really before we knew how serious it was. And when I spoke to the sergeant, I said, lieutenant's on his way in. He said, oh no, tell him to stay home, get in touch with him. It's really bad. Have him wait a little bit, but it was at that point, he was on his way. And he said that when he was coming down King Street, it was very nerve-wracking to get down King Street, especially past Rexon and Shemin's nursery, with that low point which always floods.
And that's and the thing that's different, a snowstorm, all the roads coming in are going to be slick or icy or potentially snowy. But a lot of times on flooding events, it's more isolated on the flood-prone areas. But in this storm, you had major highways that were flooded over and blocked. So like from access from employees coming in, there was places on the Sprain, and there was places all on any of the parkways where they were places that don't normally flood were literally blocked and shut down.
Because even after 287, multiple spots was completely closed because floodwaters had, covering it. It was, we had a problem. We requested the county's swiftwater rescue team to help us because we had numerous rescues we had to make, and we had all of our assets in the water doing rescues and needed additional. And it took them an hour to get from Valhalla down here because they had to go back roads, over the mountains through the woods to get down this way because they could not come down the regular normal routes. They were all flooded out.
And I think maybe it'd be good to kind of discuss the rescue areas that you went through, both Herbie and Greg and Michael. There was really some extraordinary efforts that were made by these three departments and also the county, and calling in to try to rescue and get people to safety from some of the homes, particularly Brook Lane and Avon and so forth. So maybe you can kind of talk about what occurred there, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, we had several houses on Brook Lane that were flooded and actually damaged to the point where we were worried about collapse on the structures. PD and DPW, FD, we all worked together seamlessly to evacuate the people, get them out, and then it was just couldn't do anything with the houses. We had to let them, whatever happened to them had to happen to them. But we worked well there. We ended up going over to Wyman Street, doing the same, Avon Circle as well, anywhere along the water where there were homes. But there were people trapped on the second floor of their homes that we had to go in and get. And, the three departments worked great together. DPW came in with what we call a front end loader, which is able to drive into the water and had the bucket. And we could get the bucket up high enough to where we could get people out of the second story windows and that. So it was a team effort, and it worked out. It worked out well. We were able to get everybody out of the buildings that needed to be evacuated.
Now, are you all connected with an emergency radio system or something so that you can coordinate the various groups to do that? Or how does the coordination come about?
I have a radio in my vehicle. I can speak directly to Rye Brook's police headquarters. We usually then coordinate that through them for what we need from DPW. Or we'll do that through dispatch.
And on top of the other level, the four of us talk throughout these, leading up to the events and then throughout the event as well.
Exactly. All of us are talking to one another. Example, highway department, myself, my foreman, all of us have radios in the trucks. A lot of times myself, the foreman, will use a portable, and we're monitoring two different frequencies, the highway frequency and the police frequency at the same time, plus our cell phones on top of it. I mean, it is a mess, but you try to manage it. But we respond to headquarters. Headquarters then disseminates it back. We talk amongst ourselves on one frequency, but there's always a clear channel back to headquarters if anything happens.
And the police department, we share a police frequency with Portchester and Rye Police Department. So, as bad as it was in Rye Brook, it was just as bad in Portchester and Rye. So the police frequency has, a lot of transmission, and it's hard to communicate, because everyone needs to get information out. So there's a lot of communications among the police officers just over cell phones, because that's so, thankfully, we didn't lose cell phones like we did during Sandy when we lost power. We lost cell phones, and that was very difficult to communicate that.
So most of the rescues were water rescues, from what you said?
Yeah, they were either from vehicles where people were trapped in vehicles, or they were from homes that were potentially so damaged by the running water. The water was like whitewater rapids coming down the rivers at some points, and there were homes that were foundations were undermined and that. So we had to get the people out, and those were the two main rescues types were out of vehicles or out of homes.
Yeah, and the vehicles was really tricky this time because you had a lot of different situations. You had some cars that went into water on main roads and got and couldn't get out, so they were stuck. You also had other areas that vehicles that were parked that lifted up during the storm and they went, a quarter mile downstream, places on Brook Lane where those vehicles were well into the 800 Westchester Avenue property, it crossed across Westchester Ave and all the way in very, very far down where they floated away. So, the fire department, the police, the public works, they're trying to make sure that there's not, the people inside and that try to rescue people. You have to make sure that there's people are to safety as best you can. So there's, it was very tricky in a lot of situations. And in some cases, even like I think Public Works got some people that were stuck on the hutch who were just traveling from outside the area where there was people there that even got taken to our shelter because they couldn't go anywhere on the hutch. So they brought them to our AJP Community Center where they could get sheltering in place.
Are you able to see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, and that's an example of highway working with the local agencies, the fire department, the SWIFT team here from the county, actually rescuing people from this house in the back in about 5 to 6 feet of swiftly moving water. So that's an example of all the agencies chipping in and working together. And the other photos didn't come through.
And that's a roadway right there.
And
Yeah.
this here is Brook Lane under about 5 feet of water here at this point. And this was at about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, if I remember.
Okay. And how many of these rescues did you do? I mean, I'm sure you don't have an exact count, but just to give the listeners some idea about how much activity there was it?
I mean, I think that we lost count, but there's probably dozens. I mean,
Oh, okay. So it's a pretty big number.
yeah, no, it was very high. It was very high. It happened so quick. The people getting trapped in their cars was the biggest one, but it happened that fast where they were trapped, and there were quite a few that we got to just in time to be able to get them out of the vehicle before the vehicle was completely underwater and they would have drowned.
Okay, so let's talk about we've talked a little bit about at the peak of the storm, what happened, how people reacted, how you marshaled the resources of your various departments. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what was the information feed coming in? Where was that coming from, the county, or so that you knew? I mean, I think Chief Austin said the forecast had been for the rain to basically stop at 2:30 in the morning. It was going to be a couple of hour but very violent event. When was that confirmed, or was there any new information coming in? Did you get new information you had to react to?
Yeah, I mean, the big information was the intensity in that short period of time that started picking up. That 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30, that's what has never happened here before in that type of intensity. We've had flooding and bad flooding, but the intensity that happened over that short period of time was certainly unexpected, and certainly one that was unprecedented. As I said before, there was a hazard emergency, a flood emergency, which you don't see in this area. You see warnings, but in this particular area, flash flood emergencies you don't see. And that's what happened here. It was a flash flood, and that's what you had to react to in a very, very short period of time.
Yeah, I think I should have asked the question a little differently. When was it clear that you were going to have such a lot of rain in a very short period of time? Did the Weather Service alert you to that at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock or earlier? Or it just never really
Later.
came as an alert?
Later. It
later.
it came late. I mean,
Okay.
it was supposed to be a storm. They're supposed to, they expected some flooding. Those are not unusual. We get those types of warnings very often. What happened though in that intensity picked up and it really hit this area hard. And that was what was unexpected until just prior to when it really started picking up, when you started getting the warnings of flash flood. This is an emergency now. Let's get people safe and get people to safety. And that's where it becomes more of a check and see, look for blocked roads, to more of a protecting life safety.
No, it's weather. You don't really know
Yeah.
what's going to happen until it happens. And, I mean, the weatherman has could predict as much as they want, but, until it comes, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what this was. This was just, bad weather that came on very quickly and very intensely. And, as much as we prepared for it, it was worse than we expected. And everyone was taken by surprise by this.
On the DPW's end, once you start seeing certain things, it's already bad, because we have our markers. Everybody knows the village pretty well. So when you start seeing the water level over a certain catch basin, or once you see it inching up towards a certain road, at a certain point, okay, this is beyond a normal rain event, a normal flooding. So, for example, on Wyman Street, we know we get water down there, but it usually comes up 2-3 feet into the roadway. That's fine, and we know that, and we can manage that. But at this point, by 9:30, you're seeing that water is 8 feet up into the road. That's it. It's done. So, and that was only the beginning of the storm.
So certainly we have indicators. We look to see, all right, how much storm is left on it? What's the weather? Is the ground hard? Is the ground soft? What's the high tide even in Long Island Sound, to see when the tide, because the Blind Brook will go in 2 different directions at some points, particularly down in Rice City, which will then prevent the water from getting out. So there's all these types of indicators you look at. But when you get that volume of water to almost the 500-year level, that's an amount of water that you can't, it's hard to predict, but it's also hard to, at that point, you're really going more to life safety measures.
Okay. Yep, and like Chris said, and a chief, the storm ended about 2:30. By about 4 o'clock that night, or that morning, I should say, many of the roads that were covered over were already drivable. Okay, that just goes to show you how quickly the water receded, with high tide being back to normal, everything being down low, everything in a matter of 2.5 hours. I will tell you, the Betsy Brown was drivable. I believe upper part of Bowman was drivable, all in a matter of 2.5 hours. That's how quickly it started to recede. But it came much quicker than it went.
Right. So now let's say we're in kind of, the peak is past and the rain is stopped and the waters are receding. What action, I assume there was a certain amount of emergency repairs you needed to do, or other actions, or that people had to get involved with. What happened at the tail end of the storm?
Well, at the tail end, even throughout the storm, we had the report of the 2 motorists that were swept away and were tragically killed. That we went in for another, it was another 2 days that we continued to search for for them, and that was very hard, because the people live in Rye Brook. Their car was found on Lincoln Avenue at the exit for the hutch. Harrison police came across it. The car was obviously swept away. Since they lived in Rye Brook, Harrison was contacting us to see if we could check their house and check their family, and Harrison police was had to put an emergency ping on their cell phones so we could locate their phones, and their phones were pinging in on the houses on Lincoln Avenue, in the rear of those houses along the brook. and it wasn't until daylight that one of the bodies was recovered, and then it wasn't for another 2 days. But Harrison Police, they had New York State Police Swift Water Rescue in looking for them. They had helicopters. There was infrared tracking done, and that was a rescue effort between Rye Brook Police, Harrison Police, New York State Police, Westchester County Police, fire departments, Portchester Fire Department, Rye Brook Fire Department, all assist with that, Rye Brook DPW. I mean, there was a lot of coordination that really went beyond the storm. After daylight hours, that for a few days, that that was just terrible, and and it was so terrible for the family that we had to endure that. And that's the first time, and I hope the only time, that we ever have to suffer a loss like that.
Yeah, we were involved in that for those 2 days afterwards until the last body was recovered. But we went from the hutch all the way down to into the keyhole, searching with boats, people in the water. Multiple times the New York State Police dive team was put into the water because the dogs thought they might have found something. So yeah, we were there. We ended up doing the body recovery because it was entangled in some debris, but it was a 2-day effort. Besides we had Purchase and West Harrison Fire Departments involved in that. It was an extensive manpower search between all agencies to try and locate the two individuals.
Yep, and then on the DPW end, we assisted with the police department and helped them in checking some cars, which now were no longer underwater. So we worked with them on that. And then at a certain point, we backed away from that. And then we went back and checked on our infrastructure. Many manhole covers were blown out, had to find covers and put them back in place. We had to check the storm drain systems. We had suffered some damage in some drainage areas. We had to clean out our system from sand and silt and dirt. So it was a few weeks of ongoing work after a storm. We spent close to, I'm going to say, over $200,000 in repairs worth of damage just on infrastructure.
And I should say, in terms of communication, we also involved the mayor and the village board on everything we've been talking about. So throughout the night, throughout the event, I keep the mayor up to date on everything, and then the mayor keeps the board up to date on everything, and any decisions that have to be made, the mayor and I would talk about as well.
And Chris, the mayor came out like 5 a.m. with us, and was the damage. We picked him up at 5 a.m. because he wanted to get out as soon as it was possible. And
that's right.
And
then also the two people that passed lived in his neighborhood too, so that was also very disturbing.
Well, it seems to be an amazing amount of coordination among the various groups that needed to be coordinated in what was clearly an unexpectedly severe event. So that's really very impressive. I congratulate you all. Maybe we could talk a little bit about next steps. Mm-hmm. What do we think we need to do to plan to mitigate the effects of this type of storm? I know there's been some talk of a role for the federal government or FEMA, I don't remember which, in buying some of the homes that are most at risk. But are there any other plans afoot?
Oh, sure. There's a lot of plans. And I will say, out of all the communities in the county, I think Rye Brook has done probably more than most, by the vast majority, in terms of studying flooding prone areas and then making changes and physical changes. We've added detention basins that, wasn't exactly very popular for us to do that, but it was meant to control and hold back water, things like that. And a lot of other infrastructure improvements that we've done throughout the years. So there's some projects that were already in the works, and there's others that we're looking to do going forward. I'll kind of give a quick update on several. We've been studying Avon Circle, which flooded bad in 2007. It flooded bad again in this storm. So it's an expensive project. It's $7.2 million project. We've already secured basically $3.5 million towards that project. So now we're seeking, and we've submitted grants for the other side of that to get the balance of it. And we're continuing to find the additional $3.5 million to help us fund that. So that's an interesting one where you're trying to, basically you're taking the flood retention area of Avon Circle. That's a problem because there's people that live there, and it's basically creating a bigger system where the water would be then moved downstream underneath the Portchester Middle School field, which would be elevated with a big storage underneath it. So it would actually help even downstream from there, but this is one that would help solve the Avon Circle problem. In terms of the Brook Lane and Wyman and Rockridge areas, one of the projects that we're very interested in right now, with the help of Senator Meyer and Mayor and also Steve Otis, we've been working with the National Resource Conservation Service on what they call a floodplain easement program. And this is, John, what you were referring to. We've identified properties on Wyman Street, Brook Lane, and Rock Ridge that the federal government would come in, purchase the properties, restore the floodplain. And basically what that means is they would take down the houses and build the floodplain in that area. And then we would have to be the sponsor, but they pay for the federal government pays for it. And then they build the floodplain, they pay the cost for that. And then we've got to maintain it going forward. That's a voluntary program. So we're currently at the step where we've identified the homes. We've given all the cost for such a project. They're seeking to get money from the state version of the NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service, is going to the federal government to say, do we have enough funding in a project here? And if they do, we're able to go to the community and see who's interested in it. So, and there's an agreement that we put in place. So that's one that's very promising for those that feel where there's really not a lot of other solutions. And that's one of the areas like Brook Lane. We studied that area in the past, and there's just in that area, because it's such a low-lying area, there's just not a lot of physical improvements that can be done on those properties. So when there's no other real solutions there, this is a project that fits for that. But that doesn't mean for those that want to stay there that there's not other things we're working on. One of the things we're working on is there's been an identified basin to be built that could be built on Purchase College property, which would help flow the water. You can't make water go away, right? So you have to move it somewhere or hold it somewhere, either let it go, which could flood other areas, or hold it back. So what this would do would hold back a lot of water, but using SUNY Purchase property. In the past, SUNY Purchase wasn't interested, but now with new efforts, we're told they are more interested and would consider something like that. So we're trying to work with them to try to get them to really say, okay, you guys could do that. So we're working with our state senator and assemblyman to try to see if that can occur. And then for anyone else in the community, we're trying to get just basically participate in the FEMA community rating system. What that is flood discounts. Flood insurance, a couple of decades ago wasn't the cost that it is today. Flood insurance is very, very expensive. So right now, only 3 communities in Westchester participate in that program. So we want to be the 4th. So we have an application in, we've had our site reviews, and basically we're hoping to get somewhere between 5 and 15% discounts on flood insurance. So that we think that would help people as well. In the past, maybe that wasn't as big decades ago, but that's now a lot of money because flood insurance has been now very expensive. So those are a few of the projects that are currently in the hopper. And there's other things we're working on as well, but those are some of the bigger projects.
Chris, maybe as a matter for the listeners, what percentage of the homes in Rye Brook do you think are inside, let's say, 100-year flood zone?
Oh, Michael, what do you think? Over 100, right?
I would probably guess close to 200, 250
Yeah.
probably, that are in an active floodplain
100-year
in a 100-year storm event.
Right.
That's just ballparking, but yeah, we have a significant amount.
Okay.
Which once again, it makes it hard when you try to do a study, because when you do a watershed evaluation, like what we're actually talking about doing, a reevaluation, there's only so much that you could do within such an area, like on Brook Lane, as Chris mentioned. There's only so much that you could do to stop that, because that is a very low spot.
And we have done engineering studies of it, and they said on Brook Lane, it came back as there's not a lot you can do right there. And unfortunately, a lot of the improvements have to be done either in Harrison or on state property and purchase. So it's not property that Rye Brook controls. You know, if it would be easier if it was in Rye Brook, but these aren't. So you have to be able to work with your neighbors, and that's what we're trying to do. Let me pull up a screen just to show you, John. This is Brook Lane. So if you look at the blue area, that's the 100-year storm area. And you can see, and the pinkish area is the 500-year. And you can see right where these properties were that were damaged, you can see it was right on target. And remember we said it's 100, closer to a 500-year. This was really right on target for the properties that flooded. So all to the right is Rye Brook, to the left of the dotted line is the brook. To the left is Harrison, to the right is Rye Brook, and these properties are all the ones that flooded in that storm, and it was very accurate. So that's what we're trying to see if we can help in those areas.
Okay. All right. Well, this has really been very helpful and very informative. I'm wondering if any of you would like to make any kind of closing comments or talk about something we haven't raised before.
I'd like to, if you don't mind. I just want to say, you know, the team really works great together. You know, the police, the fire, EMS, Public Works, everybody really works great together. You know, everyone drops everything and says, you know, what can we do to help each other? And that's always so nice to see in this community. The other thing that we didn't mention is the group that really helps out a lot is after the storms, you know, the community and some of the community volunteers. And in this case, Liz Rodfeld, our senior citizen coordinator, really did a lot working with community volunteers that need a lot of help, particularly on things like working with the county to find areas for relocation. People had to move out of their homes for a period of time where their homes got repaired. You had mold issues and communication issues that she really put in so much time with community volunteers. You know, we had high school groups from Portchester and Blindbrook that were literally helping residents pull stuff out of their homes and bring it to the curb so it'd be collected. You know, you had just community volunteers ready to help, and that was so special to see and make such a difference being in a small community, how people really want to help each other. It was really wonderful. You know, this was so unprecedented. Even on the staff end, you know, you had Public Works guys working on private fire trucks, trying to, you know, that you don't see on garbage trucks. Yeah, our contractor for garbage trucks, we're working on their trucks, working together to try to get the community cleaned up and get it back safe again. You know, it was quite an effort. You had cars stacked up in the roadways that had to be moved and located, and you know, people were out and about. You know, people were trying to move and get their houses and get information about FEMA and reimbursement and insurance. These are hard issues for people. You know, these are really difficult things for families to look at their homes and see those damage. But you had really caring people, I think, that really wanted to try to help in any way they could. And that was really special to see.
And I will also add that our sanitation company, CRP, really stepped up, really worked with the guys, and their crews really cared. They worked long hours here. Number-wise, we actually hauled out over 430 tons, if I remember correctly, of trash in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. That's just insane. We typically haul out as much in a year on our bulk trash days. So everybody from high school to the kids to everybody chipped in.
Oh, that's very encouraging to hear. That's a great effort by the community. All right, well, anyone else want to make a comment? Okay, well, I think in closing, I'd say that, as I noted earlier, the coordination is really quite impressive in a kind of crisis event that was unexpected. So that really a tribute to you fellows as the leaders of your various organizations. And I know, counting the cleanup effort, which Michael just talked about, I'm sure the whole community is very appreciative of your efforts. So thank you very much for being on the program today and for giving us some insight into how the storm event unfolded.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, John.
Thank you.